Hello, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, Challenge with Multiple EHRs, Reusable Data Models to the Rescue. My name is Michelle Perry, Vice President of Web Analytics at Practical Data Solutions. And joining me today is Russell Hendrickson, President and CEO.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Very excited to share this topic with you.
So over the past few years, and actually probably even beyond, it's been pretty common for us to receive calls from organizations who are switching systems or migrating to a new system. They're asking for assistance, saying their users want their analytics reporting during this transition period in one place. And they're asking us is how can we help them achieve that during the transition period? Not only are organizations transitioning, but they're being acquired or they're merging systems. So another common request that we're getting is organizations are going to another health system, so that now I've got multiple systems, and their users want to be able to report from both systems, because obviously I got still some AR in that older systems. However, the systems don't line up. So during today's webinar, we're going to explore some solutions to these types of questions.
Yeah, and even through COVID, you would have thought maybe these mergers and acquisitions would have slowed down a little bit, but according to PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2021, there was growth of more than 56% versus 2020. And then in 2022, year to date, we've seen the highest amount of revenue in mergers and acquisitions, doubling out at 19.2 billion, and some of these are very large mergers and acquisitions that have occurred, but the trend still continues, which is organizations are getting bigger, merging, buying, and it's very common that you'll find not just one or two practice management systems or EHRs, but 3 or 4 in a large health system today is not unusual, and that presents some data and analytics challenges, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so especially with today's economy, these mergers and acquisitions on the rise, it's really important for organizations to keep a close eye on their financials and their key KPIs. So the end users want all of their data in one place. They want the simplicity of reporting where the data comes from multiple systems and we can integrate it into one application. So here's an example of a visualization where I can go to one system. You can see we've blended system A with system B. So I've got one source of truth. I can look at my charges and payments aggregated together, or I can look at the individual systems. So when we think about blending systems, we think that one system and one system is going to be one system, but that's not really what happens. It's really 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, and how we get to 3 is that first system is one system A, then system B becomes another system. But in order to really blend data, however we're going to join, blend, or try to make it easier for the users to understand what's going on in the organization, we need to build or merge at some level that combines systems of data. And so it really means we end up giving the users access to 3 different table structures or 3 different sets of databases. And ultimately, the users want it all in one place. And so that's really what we're talking about today is how do we make that come together, and how do we make it in such a way that it's both logical, easy, but also accurate. And there are some real challenges when organizations try to take 2 different systems and put them together if they don't take the right approach.
Yeah, unfortunately, many systems think there's this misconception that I can just take that system B that I just acquired and just put it into system A and I'm going to get one system. However, that's very rare that situation happens. Even if you're running 2 epics or 2 all scripts, you may be on different versions, there may be different table structures, so they're not always exactly the same. So because of that, data doesn't always align, and it makes it very difficult to blend those 2 systems together. But as we look at data elements, blending systems, there are a few common items between 2 systems. Both systems will have providers, and every provider has an NPI. So probably could align those fairly easily by putting the NPIs in both systems. You know, where you're using CMS standards like, you know, place of service codes 11, 21, or even your CPT codes, those tend to be standard across if you're using those CMS standards. So charges tend to be charges, you know, there's pretty easy to line up. But these are just a handful of data elements when we're looking at a large application. So we obviously couldn't line up everything, but these few could be done with a minimal amount of effort.
So let's look at some of the other metrics that appear to be the same. They sound the same. If you go into each system, for example, and you were to pull RVUs, you know, there's an RVUs metric or measure. You can go pull that out of system A and system B. But the reality is that RVUs rarely are calculated the same way between two different systems. As a matter of fact, it's more common they're not calculated the same way. And in some cases, there can be various fairly large discrepancies. But even things that seem easy, like payments and payment codes, will be different. The way they break out payments, credit card payments from cash at time of service, you know, collections taken through the mail, et cetera. It can be very different. Adjustment codes, breaking out bad debt from contractual adjustments. In some cases, you'll find quite a bit of variation. Even things like AR, one system might re-age the AR when it's rebilled, another system might not. So you run into a number of different metrics that sound like you can just line them up, but often cases, they're not really measuring the same thing. And some of the things that can be mapped or manually joined can take a significant amount of work. And so if you think about, you know, two different systems, and even though you'll have these same insurance payers or insurance plans, you know, you could have a large health system, even a smaller practice could have, you know, 1,000 or 2,000 different payers. And so you'd have to manually try to join or line up or build a map and maintain every single insurance company between system A and system B if you really want to try to make all that data line up. And that's where some of the challenges come into play, is trying to get all of that data to line up in a way that when you put it together, it actually does mean the same thing. So although it can be done in some cases, in other cases, it's just so much work to try to maintain, it may not be worth the effort.
Yeah, and not only thinking about items that you might want to map, like those categories, but, you know, you'll have to look at some recalculations. So that's going to be another consideration when blending systems, is to look at those calculated metrics between systems. You want to make sure that the data that you're providing to your end users have integrity within that blended data set. For example, one system may be calculating, you know, collection rate with net charges while the other is using your gross charges. So you want to make sure that blended data is, you agree on what that calculations, and it's appropriately defined within that combined system. You know, Russell just talked about RVUs. You know, RVUs are commonly require recalculation because there's no two vendors, no two organizations that are calculating them exactly the same. You know, one may be doing modifier adjustments while the other isn't. So you're going to have to agree with that combined system. What is that calculation going to be? And you're going to have to recalculate those. Even things like your scheduling utilization rates, you want to look at those and understand, you know, you're going to have different templates and things like that. So you want to make sure not only look at your mapping and blending data, but look at your calculations.
Yeah, I was going to say, Michelle, those areas you just touched on, we spend a lot of time here at BDS when organizations are either switching systems or trying to merge data from multiple systems, trying to come up with what is the definition. And in some cases, they may not exactly know how the first system was calculating some of these metrics. So you even run into that challenge where you may not have a clear definition. It's just kind of, that's how we always did it, right? So, but certainly things that you need to be aware of. Some of the other things when we think about this, and you know, we use the word practical here, obviously it's in our name, practical data solutions, but I like to say be practical about your approach, right? So if you're going to combine data, you're going to have to do some summarizations or some mappings, but it may not be feasible to try to combine every single, you know, dimension, every single metric, and it may not be feasible, you know, to map them because the mapping and the timing to try to do this, you know, may not be worth the time or the effort, you know. And related to that, you really have to evaluate there's this diminishing value. If you're switching systems, it's sometimes easier to say, well, we know we're going to be off the system, even if we're going to run out the AR for a year. You may want to look at the diminishing returns, which is, if we have to sort of manually pull reports, or if we have to live with just high-level mappings, can we do some summarization or combining of data manually, knowing that in a year over time, the value of that old data tends to diminish versus the cost and the resources to map it. And so one way to do that, obviously, is if you can pull metrics and you're confident at the level that they can be combined. If you're migrating systems, this tends to be a little easier than if you're going to be running two systems for a long period of time. But you could use something as simple as Excel or a visualization tool where you're just joining A and B, system A and B, obviously making sure that the metrics you're joining on make sense. For those of you who are PDS customers on the call, one, thanks for being a PDS customer, but too many of you know the PDS Dash tool makes it easy for you to blend data from multiple systems into Excel, and the same approach works here and can help with some of the automation around that. So some things to consider is, the value of that data. If you're not going to be running more than one system for a long period of time, you may want to consider somewhat a semi-manual process.
Yeah, and another consideration when you're talking about reporting and blending metrics is during that acquisition and changing of systems, it's kind of a good time to sort of what I would call spring cleaning. Evaluate the metrics that you're using today. Maybe it's time to start doing something different. We've been talking about RVUs. Maybe it's time we actually calculate RVUs with the appropriate modifiers and look at what those adjustments should be. AR is another area where you might want to step back and evaluate what calculation are we doing. Maybe we need to move to a better standard of that days in AR calculation. So it's really a good time to not only clean up metrics, but even improve your metrics. Maybe you're doing a denial count, and maybe now we should do that based on a match denial count, so that can get a more accurate denial ratio. Maybe I want to remove some informational denial so I can get a clearer understanding of what the true denial rate is. So again, as I mentioned, this is a good time to clean up your metrics and clean up your reports. If you've always done the same report, or you've always done the same visualization, now that you're blending and merging things together, look at what you're doing, and maybe you need to move to a better or more standard KPI.
Yeah. And, Michelle, related to that, you really have to think about what are business users' needs, right? So as you step back and say, well, we've got these challenges, it's really going beyond just how do we merge, some of the metrics in our EHR, blending that data, but what about all the other data the users need? Is it time to reevaluate even the analytics tools or your analytics strategy? How do we get the users not just, blending two systems or RVUs, but how do we get the users the right information to understand, how is our budget being hit against, our expected or our current revenue? How is, where do our costs fall in line with our budgets, and what are our projections, where we see performance opportunities? And so it really comes down to trying to make sense of all the data. If we're going to have to structure data and build tables or blend data into systems, we really want to think about a data-driven organization and thinking about all the different data that the users might need and what is our strategy. And so we talk about the concept in this webinar is reusable data models. And so whether we're blending two systems data, we're trying to integrate other data, let's explore just a little bit the warehouse strategies and data modeling designs that allow us to build reusable data marts to best serve the organization. There's really two common data warehouse strategies. There's this kind of top-down think big strategy where we're going to try to plan everything up front and design sort of the whole enterprise data warehouse. The other approach is this, what we call the bottom up, and kind of to think in phases or pieces. How do we build a piece of the puzzle, add another piece, and add another piece to try to join up? And so these two approaches are typically associated with the two leaders in analytics who founded these approaches.
Yeah, so the pioneer of that, what you're calling top-down approach, Russell, is really Bill Inman. And this is where exactly like, so I'm looking big picture. This is enterprise-driven, got a big picture approach where I'm going to get all of the data in a centralized location. So this approach is going to focus on really the data warehouse, my hardware, what's my data model going to look like, and how am I going to continue to maintain that. So this is that large-scale thinking approach. On the other side of is the what we refer to as the bottom-up approach, and this is really been led by Ralph Kimball. And this approach has the same enterprise goal, so I'm still working towards the same end result, except I'm going to focus on individual data marts being delivered in phases. So this is where I still end up with a data warehouse, but my users can start using the data and getting return on investment on that data model as I continue to build. So the data warehouse ends up being segmented into self-contained, consistent data marts, where again, users can get to the data sooner while IT continues to build out the rest of the data warehouse.
Yeah, and so sort of this Inman versus Kimball, what we've seen in healthcare, and we've certainly helped organizations with both approaches. The Inman typically tends to be a bigger, let's plan the whole thing up front, a bigger design versus the Kimball approach, more iterative. Here at PDS, we prefer the Kimball model, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But Michelle, do you have a preference for a data model?
I personally like the Kimball model, again, so I can get the user's results faster. So again, I can build structure one at a time. And one of those structures is this star schema data model. So with this data model, it consists of a fact table with the dimension tables providing additional information. So in my fact, I might have a financial where I've got charges and payments. And then in the dimension tables, I've got my organizational structures like departments, locations, providers, where I can get additional information about department name, a cost center, provider NPI. So if you look at the right-hand side of that image, if it's a little small, but hopefully you can see it. So that red outline at the top, so that's my fact table. So I've got all of my facts, and then all of my supporting dimensions are on the outside of that. So in those dimensions, sometimes are alias views and sometimes they're actual tables. So it depends on how that is structured. So Russell, you want to pull up a visual that where we can see one of these examples. So here's where I've utilized a financial or billing fact table with my dimensions in this star schema data model. So I can slice and dice through different divisions, different groups, and I can see all of the charges associated with them. I even got on the right-hand side, I've got a list of providers along with some key metrics. So this way here, the users can start utilizing this one data mart, evaluating performance, evaluating financials, and start getting some return on investment with the data warehouse, while IT is continuing to build some additional data marts at the same time as the end users are using this one. So like I said, we could build one, and then with this bottom-up approach, I can continue to build data marts where I've got reusable elements, which allows me to blend data within a business intelligence tool. So here's another example of a visualization that was built in the PDS Empower Analytics tool. And here you can see I've got my blended systems A and B. I've blended my financial data, that top left, also with my appointment data on the top right, and I've even got some patient satisfaction and of course some other payer information in the middle. So I was able, with that star schema model with some common dimensions, I can blend that data together.
Yeah, and so you might be asking the question, well, this looks like a visual dashboard, what's unique about it? Why do we need these reusable data models? So we have blended data. We talked about some of the things you need to be careful of with blending data. But the fact that we've designed this using the star schema gives us this capability. We can go from our visual dashboard that was maybe for the executives or summary level for the leadership team, and we can go right into the data behind the dashboard into what is an OLAP capability or a cube capability, where I can now slice and dice through the data, asking questions of the data that we didn't see in the other dashboard. Here we're looking at just, let's say, the Blue Shield charges. We're looking at them across different divisions. I can set additional filters to run down a division. I can even bring in dimensions or reporting elements that didn't exist in the visual dashboard. So now we're just looking at hospital charges that were done in cardiology for Blue Shield, and we'll just pick a provider here, right? And from here, so I'm doing analysis, I can do calculated metrics, I can filter, I can, save, slice and dice, drill, limit, but I can go all the way down to the actual detail. If I just click on this charges in July for Todd Allen for Blue Shield, and I click on it right here, it's gonna run me from the cube or that summary data set down into the actual patient level detail. So here I am now down in the table that was structured as a star schema, rolled up into a cube and then summarized for the visualization. And I can continue to slice and dice through data, filter on data, add dimensions. Maybe we wanted to bring in the procedure codes because we didn't have them in our initial report. Well, of course, I need to look at the charges to see the procedures, but as you can see here, I can continue to work with the data at the table level, in this OLAB or cube level, and of course, to build out my visual dashboards. That capability is what's key because we're using this star schema approach, because we've modeled our data appropriately. And to go a little further then, some organizations, they bring one tool in for visualization. Maybe they're using Tableau or Power BI. Then they bring in another tool for Cube or OLAP technology. Maybe they're using pivot tables in Excel. And then third, they might be using something like business objects for detailed reporting. And so the challenge with that is you've got to have 3 different sets of data definitions, even though you're trying to serve different tools. But the second thing is you're not making it easy for the users. And so what we really want to do as a data-driven organization to best serve those user needs is if we can have one single tool set, that can drive whatever type of reporting the different business users needs, be it visuals, OLAP capabilities, or drill down. And here at PDS, I like to think of it as if our tools aren't in harmony, they're in discord, right? So there's maybe a little music played right there, Michelle. But
yeah, right. We need some music.
That's key. The capability you're seeing though is because of these reusable data models, and then how we can evolve that even further to work with different tool sets.
Right, so with this phased in approach in the star schema data model, I can continue to build data marts. Maybe I want to add general ledger, population HCCs. Those can continue to be used on their own. Or again, with those common reusable dimensions in my star schema, I can start blending the data. So I can get a collection of data marts, which provides an enterprise data warehouse solution.
And then if we go further, and this is just what we're saying, that enterprise data warehouse solution really lines up is that we've got all of our different data sets feeding in. And because we've used the star schemas, we can join on common dimensions that allows us to cross-report between multiple systems or different applications where they make sense. And then ultimately, we can serve the users with whatever analytics tool set they might want to use, be it Power BI or Cognos or Business Objects or Hyperion or Click. It really doesn't matter because we've designed our data marts in such a way that we can actually, if we have to use multiple tools or if we at some point want to migrate tools, because the data staging is what makes it so easy to deliver to the reporting of the users.
Yeah, Russell, having that data structured in the optimized data warehouse is definitely key. So let's take a look at an example of using one data set. So maybe we want to look at cycle times here. And again, this is another visualization that's built with the PDS and Power Analytics tools. But with that star schema approach, I can start evaluating data by division or even by provider. And because I've got that optimal data structure, I could take this same data set, and if somebody wants to use Tableau, go ahead and use Tableau because of that structured data. They can get to a similar visualization. So here's an example of a visualization with that same cycle times. So again, because my data is structured appropriately, we can really apply most analytics tools to provide end users with reporting needs. I mean, you could even visualize this data with Excel if you wanted to.
Yeah, so here again, at this point, the presentation is just the tool set of what we are trying to communicate to the users, right? As a data-driven organization, we shouldn't be limited by the tool. We want to be able to bring the right data to the right users. And so as you can see, and we've actually designed all three of these dashboards to really be the same, just to illustrate that point that once you've staged and modeled what you need, the tool is secondary to the user having the information they need at their fingertips. And that's really what it's all about, trying to drive users to the right information. On the other hand, and oftentimes organizations don't realize this at the time, if you don't build it correctly, and we see this oftentimes where people will call us and engage us, and they're asking the question, well, we built this thing a few years ago and now we're trying to modify it and we can't, or now we have other data and we can't join, can you fix it? And so we have to look at it, and oftentimes it's, no, we can't. The data doesn't line up. There's sort of an incompatible model. The performance is usually terrible, right? And so it's got to either be rebuilt or retrained, and the time it's going to take to do that. You know, John Wooden once said, if you don't have the time to do something right, when will you have time to do it over? And yet oftentimes this is what we see when it isn't built right. It might have worked in the moment, it might have solved a short-term need, but over time it's not flexible enough to handle the changing needs of the organization or the new data questions that are being asked of the data that it was never designed to handle.
Yeah, performance is definitely key. If users have to wait to get, you know, results, they're just going to not use the data. So I definitely got to make sure that you do it, build it correctly up front. So other keys to success when you're taking on a project where you're trying to blend data or merge data is it's critical that you have the right team in place for the project. So this is not only just a strong technical team that's going to give you a good data model with the right DBAs and infrastructure and making sure that you have budget for hardware and things like that. That's just one piece of it. You really need to make sure that you have a strong executive sponsor as well. Somebody that's going to push the initiative, somebody that's going to be engaged in the data. So if the executives are engaged, then your end users are going to get engaged. And those executive sponsors can really encourage the end users to be engaged. And then you want to make sure that you've got the right end users and analysts engaged early to ensure that you're delivering the right data. And is it getting calculated? We talked about recalculating metrics. You know, am I calculating it correctly? Is it accurate? So you want to make sure that you've got all of those elements in the team when you start moving towards a project where you're trying to blend data. Some other keys to success is the right approach. Now, the right approach is different for every organization. So when you start off, you're going to have that discussion, decide what's going to work for your organization. Today, we talked more about that iterative build, where you can start adding value very quickly with one data mart while you continue to add additional data marts. Okay, so you can get some quick return on that data modeling. You want to ensure that you have the right support staff. So when you start out with 2 data models, you know, you probably don't have a lot of questions, but as you start adding more data marts with the iterative approach, then you probably need some more support staff. You may have some more questions with the end users. You want to make sure you've got the right people in place. And then you even want to make sure that you provide effective analytics tools. So we looked at a couple analytics tools. So the tools that can provide the user with that seamless approach. So we had talked about that harmony where I can go to one source of truth. We saw with that highly visual dashboard where I can go from that visual to slice and dice into that OLAP tool, and then I can even drill into the details. So I can get a comprehensive understanding of the data.
Yeah, training obviously is also key, and training on the tool and being able to provide ongoing training to both new users and users that may have attended training but maybe don't use analytics all the time, right? So key to train on the tool, But one of the biggest areas that we see organizations sometimes miss, or the difference between success and sort of limited success, is training on the content. What are the actual measures? What are the metrics? What have we decided on as our standards for definitions? And if they've changed, have we communicated to the organization that maybe we're using a different year of RVUs, or we're doing modifier adjustments when we weren't? So really key. And then also always keeping in mind that analytics is evolving and the user's needs are going to evolve. Many times people approach building a data warehouse as a one-time thing. We built it, we have it. No, it's evolving. It needs to be enhanced. Yeah, we kind of chuckle, right? We see this a lot, but it needs to be enhanced and supported, and really has to evolve, or it can become outdated to the user's needs. So those are some of the key things that we see making organizations successful.
Yeah, Russell, that content training is definitely critical, especially if you're changing systems. Just terminology from one system to another might be different. So you want to make sure your end users understand that. So in summary, planning is the key to any type of project, especially this type of project where you've got a lot of moving pieces. And combine and blend data where it makes sense. Only combine and recalculate your key elements. RVUs are probably key for your physician compensation. So you want to make sure that those are calculated, and I need to do those correctly. Think about the time that you're staying on that second system. So if you're staying on it for a short term, maybe you only want to map the critical elements to your organization. We talked about mapping payers. If I'm only staying there for a little while, maybe I only want to, maybe do the top 30 or top 40% of my payers, or maybe I just want to do my payer categories, rather than spending a lot of time for mapping those individual payers. And then again, assess that time for either combining or mapping data, again, depending on how long you're going to be on that system, because you don't want to be spending time where you're not going to get a lot of return on your investment there.
Yep, and just a couple other things to summarize: iterative data models that are scalable to be joined, scalable for the analytics and the user's requirements at the end user. We found that tends to be really key in healthcare, as well as planning appropriate resources and timing. I've heard this one many times. Hey, we just bought a practice. We didn't know if the physicians were going to sign on or not, and they just signed on. So hey, we need reporting in 30 days. Right, we've run into that one more than a few times. So planning appropriate resources, having the right expectations on timing. Certainly there are approaches that we've used with organizations to help you if you're in that I have short-term needs versus long-term goals. But really key, plan appropriately with both the right team, the right people, and the right resources. And that's just some of the ways that you'll be successful as you try to build and merge multiple systems and ensure that you've got the right data models underneath to support where you're headed. As a company, we are experts in staging and data modeling. We're very familiar with all the topics that you've heard discussed here. Certainly experienced in blending data or helping organizations who are migrating systems, both to understand how to build or deliver them, but even in some cases, what makes the most sense from what approach might work. We have a tremendous amount of experience working with healthcare organizations. This concludes our webinar today. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.